Hey, good people, Davia here, and time for another episode of Tales from the Shaker, a Davia Williams Stevenson podcast. I am excited about my guest today, Dr. Tim Stauffer. Let me tell you a little bit about him, and I think it's going to be an intriguing topic today. So Dr. Tim Stauffer, counseling professor and licensed professional clinical counselor, supervisory designation. In addition to his work as an educator, Dr. Stauffer has a private practice in Dublin, Ohio. He specializes in marriage counseling and sexual addiction recovery. He's a member of the American Counseling Association, the Association for Spiritual, Ethical, and Religious Values in Counseling, and the American Association of Christian Counselors. Gotcha. He completed the Level 1 training from the Gottman Institute and is certified as a sexual recovery therapist with the American Association of Sex Addiction Therapy. Tim lives in Ohio with his wife of 24 years, and they have 3 children together. And he is my friend. So let me tell you a little bit how Tim and I got to know one another. We went to grad school together at Ashland Theological Seminary, where we got our master's in clinical counseling and became fast friends. And one of the things that I love about our friendship, Tim and I are about pretty much polar opposites in just about every way I can think. Yet we have managed to, with grace, I think, and honesty, have tackled some difficult subjects. And so I want Tim to tell a little bit about his story. We're going to talk about those things that shook him up, in Tales from the Shaker. The purpose is, what I hope to do, is talk to a mover and shaker in their own life, in their own experience or sphere of influence. And that's my guest here today, Dr. Stauffer. But I also want to talk about what things, what incident, what earthquakes or what have you shook you up and caused you to think a new way, do a new thing. So we're going to hear a little bit about his story. One of the difficult topics that Tim and I have addressed or had conversation with over the years is race relations. And Tim has an interesting journey to the place where those things matter to him. So welcome.
Thank you so much.
And I'm really excited for my guests to get to know you. Yes. Well, not as I do. It's going to take a little longer. It took some years. But you're a really terrific person and have a really great story. So can you tell me, speaking about episodes or incidents or seasons that shook you up, why don't you just tackle one of those?
Well, yes, as I was reflecting, and thank you so much for having me, and I've been looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to meeting your audience in this way as well. And so it's exciting for me to be here. When I think about this idea of shaking, I probably can think of 4 movements or 4 significant times in my life of a pretty radical time of shaking. And so I'll set that, if that's okay, I'll set that up perfect. And tell a bit about that story. And I think that will lead us towards this aspect of the work we're talking about doing together around issues of race. So I grew up in Pennsylvania in very rural, conservative, religiously conservative Mennonite tradition, which is a tradition that's typically very non-political. And so when I use the term conservative, it's really in the religious sense from my childhood, but it certainly tends to be conservative politically as well in terms of the way the community would think. But I don't ever think about my childhood as being particularly unique. But as I've been outside of my Mennonite community for my adult life, and I start telling stories, I find, people find it pretty intriguing because it's a very different community than what most people have grown up in. So I grew up pretty, very conservative. The Mennonite community I grew up in was very self-contained. There was a sense in which you don't go out into the world. There was no emphasis on getting a college degree. You live within the community, work within the community, and you just do life the way life has been done. And I felt a call to ministry as a young adult in my adolescence, and I had no idea about what that meant in terms of how you pursue that, because there was no such thing as professional ministry training. It was, if you were going to be a pastor, you were just the church would just kind of appoint you. it's like they had
Okay.
a process called the lot where people in the church would just say, we think this person would be a good candidate. And if everybody agrees, you have 3 or 4 people and you put their names in a Bible, set the Bibles up on the pulpit, and someone goes up and picks a book, and the one that has the piece of paper in becomes the new pastor.
Really?
And so when I thought about this idea of feel called to ministry, I'm like, I don't have any, I had very little help, no help of thinking through what that means for me and how I think about school. So anyone in my childhood, if they found out that I have a PhD, they would say this is an unlikely candidate. My high school teachers would not, I would not have been voted as most likely to go on to college at all, let alone an advanced degree. So I really broke out of those norms as I moved into the educational world. So after high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. And so I decided to attend a Bible college for 6 weeks to take 2 classes just for personal growth and for my own interest in development. And so I did that, and that introduced me to the academic world. And I didn't do very well academically because I just wanted to play volleyball and hang out and flirt with the girls and just get to know people. And so academics was not my focus. But it did plant something in me. And it was one of those monumental decisions in my life is I decided to move to Alabama and volunteer for a year as a chaplain's assistant in a prison ministry.
That seems pretty dramatic turn, I would think, from small town. Well, I'm assuming small town.
It was yes, small town, rural town. Okay. So yes and no. So what's interesting about the conservative Mennonite community is there's a tradition of being pacifists and not participating in war. So back during the wars earlier in the century, the government provided what they called conscientious objector status for people who were not going to serve in the military. So in lieu of military service, a tradition became you go volunteer somewhere as an alternate service. And so this voluntary service movement began, and it was not uncommon for people to go and volunteer for a year or 2 in some form of ministry or in some form of benevolence or of giving back to the community.
So you're in rural Alabama at a prison doing prison ministry. Let's skip to that. Tell me a little bit about how that...
I packed my car up at 19 and I headed south and drove by myself to Atmore, Alabama, which is the place where many people now know, if you've read the Brian Stevenson stories, this was the place where Walter McMillan was incarcerated. And so this prison ministry was just down the road from several correctional facilities, and I was assigned to a county jail and to a prison that I would go to and interact with the inmates and provide spiritual chaplaincy care. And so I was a chaplain's assistant. It really rocked my world. I remember encountering an inmate one time that, as he told me his story, the way I understood the way the world's supposed to work and the way the church is supposed to work and the way faith's supposed to work wasn't, my rubric was too small. It's like things were not adding up, and I was having a crisis of faith and a crisis of understanding, how do I make sense of this? And I remember praying this prayer. I said, God, would you tear down everything that I believe? Allow me to, let's renegotiate them, and then you build back what's important for me to keep, because I don't know how to make sense of the chaos.
So what didn't make sense? Like what was the dissonance for you?
It was, so in brief, I grew up where divorce is absolutely unacceptable in the Christian life. So you cannot be divorced and remarried. Mm-hmm. So this inmate was, he was about to be sentenced, and he was going to be going away for a very long time. And his wife was going to leave him and marry this other man. Well, as he told me the story, I found out that he had seduced this woman, convinced her to divorce her husband, marry him, and now that he was going to prison for a decade or more, she was going to divorce him and go back to her first husband. my tradition said that you not only do you not divorce, but if you are divorced and remarried, you should leave your partner and try to be reconciled because God only honors one marriage. So everything she was doing was what my tradition taught me should happen. And I was like, but it doesn't feel right. It doesn't seem right. And I'm providing care to somebody who's really tore up about it. And that was just one example of how things began to crumble in my life in terms of how I understood the world. And so that became that kind of collision point with.
I remember you saying when you told me your story, and I don't know if it was after you left the prison, but being in a place where the majority of the men were Black that were in prison, other things just started not to make sense to you. You started seeing inequities. I think that might have been the beginning of your heart getting pricked in that space. I don't want to be inaccurate, but I feel like that was part of our conversation. Mm-hmm. Can we talk about that, and then where, a recent re-encounter, like you said, with the Brian Stevenson book, like that was the prison where I was, and there were things that went on that I didn't know to think were, your words will be better. Right. Tell me about that.
Right. I think like when I think back on those times, I'm not so, I think that's probably the place in which my heart was pricked. I just don't think I knew at the time that it was pricked there until later. And I remember when I was driving up the road from Atmore towards Fountain Correctional Institution, I remember seeing chain gangs of men chained together, literally chained together, in their white, prison whites, out with hoes and sticks in the field farming, and officers on horseback carrying shotguns. And I remember driving past that, and it's a bit surreal because like that's not rural Pennsylvania. It's like that's not Mennonite. It's like I don't know how to even wrap my mind around those processes. What startled me, and I think part of, as I look back, that part that pricked my heart is like there was nothing about seeing that led me to think something's wrong here. Like there wasn't an outrage internally of like, this is an injustice that's happening. Because I think like in my Mennonite tradition, there was a strong emphasis about honoring authority. Like the government is thought of as being a noble enterprise, and it just didn't strike me as
because after all, they were prisoners. So
right. They did something wrong. And even my Mennonite work ethic probably would have said something along the lines of, oh, good. At least people have to do something productive rather than just sit in a prison cell. It seems appropriate to me that they can help grow their own food. And so the aspect of working wasn't that like, there was nothing about it that really startled me other than seeing it was startling, but it didn't occur to me. But it was in that same space and time that I watched Schindler's List for the first time. And so I remember watching that movie in that same year that I was living and working in the prison. And I remember asking myself the question, okay, this was Germany, and I have clear German-Swiss roots. Like my Stauffer name is straight out of Germany. And so I'm asking myself the question, okay, I could do that too, couldn't I? Like that could be like, would have I really did something different than most Germans did under Hitler? And my honest answer had to be, I don't know. I don't know. Like I suspect that could have been me too. Another event that happened in that year was one of the pastors in the community had an affair with his secretary. And I remember in that year thinking, and it devastated the community. And I remember thinking, I could do that. Like I have the capacity to be that kind of person. I could do that too. And so it was in this vulnerable space and time in my life developmentally where I would say I was shaken to the core. And so I think back to my year in Alabama. It's 1 year out of my 48. And it's one of the most impactful years to date. And it's like so much happened to shake me in those moments and begin to sensitize me to some pretty deep issues.
Well, certainly a dissonance in the working out of your faith, as you saw it applied in other places, right? An awareness of something culturally that was different, not necessarily pricking your heart, but that a number of things, and then to begin to be sensitized and see that, should that have affected me? Would I have been a person who would have stood up for oppressed peoples, or would I have been just part of the community?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think like jumping ahead in the story. So all of this is happening. I'm asking this question about Schindler's List. I'm asking these questions about my German descent and what would I have done in Germany had I been there. And then we jump forward and I start reading what's Brian Stevenson's book? Just Mercy.
Just Mercy.
And I start reading that book and I recognize names. I recognize places. I worked for the prison ministry that staffed the chaplains on death row. And I've watched a movie, the documentary that featured the founder of the prison ministry providing chaplaincy care to Johnny Evans, who was electrocuted just maybe a year or so before Walter McMillan got into the prison. I forget the timelines exactly.
So there's likely some sort of
the likelihood, not the likelihood. The reality is that chaplains from the organization I was a part of walked past Walter McMillan's cell regularly. Yeah. And it was dysregulating for me because all of a sudden I'm like, oh, maybe I am that German who, like, I'm participating within these systems where things are going on and injustices are occurring and I'm blind to it. Like I simply don't see it. And I remember it kind of rattled me. I'm like, okay. And this is after we have met and we're talking about the kind of work we wanted to do together. And I just remember thinking, there it is. There, here's my, I'm not being willfully blind. It's like, if anything, I'm asking God to open my eyes to help me to be the kind of man he created me to be. And I want to live honorably. And at the same time, I'm blind to injustices that I just don't see it. It was startling to me.
I tell you, one of the things that I admire about you in our friendship is just that willingness to self-reflect, to hold yourself accountable, to be open to other perspectives. It's a courageous stance to take. It's so much easier, I think, now to go unexamined and just follow the pool of conversation, the pool that is at this point in time incredibly polar, right? And it's countercultural.
Right. I suppose that it is. I think it's hard for me to think about living differently than that. Like there's an element of, I think I'm predisposed or have been taught or it's like if I see a crowd going a certain direction, I kind of make the assumption I probably should go the other way. Like there's probably a contrarianness in that. There's certainly if you interviewed my folks, so you might hear some stories about you might hear some stories about my capacity to be a bit contrarian.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And
imagine.
so I know there is that element. And I always think in terms of spectrum and degrees, it's like often our greatest strengths are also the place in which we run into our liabilities. And so my contrarianness has its strengths. It has its downsides as well. But I want to live. I remember in that year in Alabama, I remember praying a life-changing prayer, and it was, God, take me the long way so that I have the character to sustain your call in my life. And that prayer was impactful for me. One, because it oriented me to how I'm going to live in the world. Like I'm not going to take shortcuts. I'm not interested in pursuing the quickest gain for myself. I would rather be a man of character than pursue other ways of. I don't want to make a name for myself or somehow become great, and so I want to take the long road.
Well, I want to direct us to talking about, you alluded to a couple of times, our work together. So after grad school, okay, there's a funny story that I do want to bring up. So we became friends in grad school, and were we done with school when we got the couples together? I don't know, somewhere along that space.
It was somewhere
we decided
early.
to have dinner.
It was early, yes.
Yeah, with as with our spouses together and introduce them. And my husband and I got there first, which is already unusual, but we got there first and we were waiting and having a conversation. And oftentimes we have to go to dinners together because of his work, and I get a briefing. What are their names? What's the, so he was asking for a briefing. I says, well, his wife's name is LaRonda, and they have 3 kids. And he said, LaRonda? He married a Black woman? And I said, I think that would have come up, And then we started talking about the kids. And I don't know, I can't remember if Eric and I knew their names at that time. I don't remember how, maybe that was in our conversation later. And your beautiful children, who I know now, Michaela, Adelie, and Kyrell. And he said, Kyrell? Like, are you sure? It must have been before. Yeah. It must have been before you stepped in. And we thought that was really funny. Certainly a stereotypical joke about what our names sound like. But that was really funny.
Yes, that was very. Yeah.
So
and by the way, for your, my wife is not.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah. She's Canadian, yes. and from a Mennonite background as well, yes. I do believe. And so we stayed in touch probably a couple times a year, have breakfast or something. And one of the things I appreciate about our friendship is that we've always been able to talk about difficult subjects, mm-hmm. including issues of race. And we started thinking that maybe there's something to the way we have conversation that we could maybe model. Our churches are very segregated. Maybe that's a place where we start. And then we'd say, okay, we'll talk about that. And we go away and then have breakfast again in 6 or 8 months and talk about the same thing. Right. And then the incidents of the spring of 2020. Mm-hmm. And that was George Floyd's death and many other things that happened during that period of time, where it was one of those, we're going to do this or not. Mm-hmm. And so we got together and worked on some things. Yes. And if you want to describe what we're doing, what we're moving into, I'm excited about it.
I think that moment in time was the crystallization of really years of development of this idea. Your husband certainly was encouraging us to really move into this space. Hey, you guys have what it takes to do this work together, and you ought to. And we were all busy, and we had plenty of things to do. And so I think that crystallized after George Floyd's murder that we said, no, it's time. Like we have a moral obligation to engage in conversation. And I think like our current political climate, not even just political climate, just the culture as a whole right now is so it's so polarized. And if somebody disagrees with you, that's tantamount to they must be committed to some sort of totalitarian fascist, some sort of, it's like we will put people in these radically extreme camps over disagreements that don't warrant that level of treatment. And so it's like, and what I fear is that that's just going to become self-fulfilling prophecy. Like we actually will move, the more we treat each other that way, the quicker we will move to that kind of outcome. And we need voices in our culture that say, whoa, time out. We need to slow down we need to change the tone and how we relate, and find our places of commonality and our places of agreement, and have a very different kind of conversation. And so I'm hopeful that that's the work we can help facilitate. It feels like it's a little bit above my pay grade. Like it's emotional. It's hard. It's hard work, because there's the tendency for everybody to put something into the extreme. And what's hard is there are extreme stories that everybody can point to. And so it's like we can so easily polarize, and we distrust one another so severely. We need some model or some we need people.
A mechanism.
We need a mechanism. We need a structure. We need some sort of way in which we can demonstrate that this can be done differently. And I think maybe I think about the story of Esther in the Old Testament with Mordecai when Mordecai says to Esther, perhaps the Lord has brought you into being the queen for such a time as this. And so I think there's that part for me. It's like, okay, it's the time, and I'm willing to lean into it. And again, I think that's probably my contrarian. It's probably one of the strengths of being a bit contrarian. There would be lots of social pressures for me not to engage in conversations related to race.
Yeah. I mean, I'm certainly in them, but to take the posture that I need to take of openness in spite of my own injury, and that I recognize it takes a toll.
For sure.
But I think it's important. There was a point in time when I'm like, I don't think I want to do this. And you challenged me, similar to that Esther story. Then who will?
Right.
Somebody should. Then who will?
Right.
And so I was shamed and then convicted. You shamed me first.
I didn't shame.
Because I had a word for you that would be very much against your Mennonite tradition.
Yeah, so you would have to hit that
my
beat.
mother
Where's
would
the beat?
Yeah,
Where's the beat button?
And then I got busy. And so we're working on I don't know how much. Well, we have a company.
We do.
And it's called Just Matters. And we want to work with small groups of leaders. We do this. We work with small groups of leaders, and we take them through a series of conversations. We help them become sensitized, and we model in real time with them how to move from a guarded position and embrace a conversation with someone around issues of race. And I think just humanity. I think it's good work anyway. Much of the structure you presented, and it's based on a conflict resolution model marriage. I think it's very good. And until I know that the other model, your line of toxicity, is safe to promote, I think that's brilliant. You've come up with a brilliant illustration of the pressures of society right now. I'm excited about what that will do for you and for others. Yeah,
I'm looking forward. We're launching our website, justmatters.com.
Yeah.
And so I hope that your audience will check that out and take a look at that. And I'm hopeful that we can, in some small way, and I think this goes back to when I watched Schindler's List. I remember thinking, what would I have done?
Yeah.
Like, not how I feel about something, but like, will I take any kind of tangible action in an area in which I see an injustice occurring? Am I willing to do that? And am I willing to pay the price for it? Like, will I, and I think I want to do that. And I think our work for me this is one small way that, I can say I am taking action. I'm not just saying, oh yeah, I hate that happens and, shouldn't happen, but I want to help facilitate a different kind of conversation.
Well, those prayers that you prayed about God taking you the long way, that prayer about deconstructing all that you are and build you back up to who you want to be. I think even our work with Just Matters, I think our work as counselors allow people to deconstruct old held lives and belief systems and reconstruct some that is more in line with who you want to be. I think that's consistent with the work that we want to do with Just Matters. And so it is courageous work. I think it's necessary work. I know it's emotional but it's important. Right. And I am certainly grateful to have you as my friend and partner in this space. We hold one another accountable. Laugh at each other every time something comes up that we haven't processed, and folks get to see it happen in real time. And I think that's usually very helpful. Yeah. So thank you so much for being my guest. We'll see what happens with our business as it continues to grow. I'm real excited about it. Let me talk about the drink. We got to finish out what we're shaking.
Absolutely.
so I did not get you drunk. But I know you love coffee. And so I just made a coffee drink with Kahlua. Our whipped cream is already melted and had some chocolate shavings and all that, but just a little bit of spiked coffee to enjoy our conversation with this morning. Yes. Well, good. Well, cheers. We got a clink and then sip. Cheers. This has been another episode of Tales from the Shaker with a Davia William Stevenson podcast. Thank you for joining me. I'm looking forward to your listening on all podcast platforms. And take care. We'll talk to you soon.